The alarm on the palace wall let out a sharp cry, and every guard in the hall dropped into position. Queen Valith Ironscale stood at the center of the room, her hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial blade she rarely needed to use. Something had breached the outer gate. Again. For the third time this month, an unmarked ship had tried to slip past the orbital shield around the Crithian capital. The council was still arguing about who was responsible. Valith did not have time for arguments. She had a summit to prepare for, a treaty to sign, and an empire that had not fully healed from a war fought 10 years ago. She turned toward the door just as it opened, and a new face stepped through it. He was tall, with short brown hair, and a calm, steady walk that did not match the panic spreading through the rest of the hall. He wore the uniform of the human peacekeeping force, the one Earth had sent as part of the new alliance. His name tag read Ethan. He gave a short nod to the officer beside him, took his place at the doorway, and stood still, watching the room with sharp, careful eyes. Valith felt her breath catch in her throat. It was not his uniform. It was not his rank. It was his face. The line of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared when he stood at attention, the quiet, unshaken calm in his eyes as chaos moved around him. She had seen that exact posture before, in a man who had been dead for 10 years, a man she had loved. A man whose ashes had drifted into the void of space after a battle that should never have happened. King Draven, her husband. For a moment, the alarms, the shouting guards, and the entire empire seemed to fade into silence. She stared at Ethan as if she had seen a ghost walk through the palace doors wearing a stranger's clothes. "Your Majesty?" Chancellor Voss appeared at her side, his voice pulling her back into the moment. "The breach has been contained. A supply freighter. Nothing more. False alarm." Valith blinked and straightened her spine, forcing her expression back into the calm mask she wore for the court. "Good," she said. "Stand the guards down." Voss followed her gaze toward the doorway, toward the new human guard standing quietly at his post. His eyes narrowed, just slightly, but he said nothing. Valith walked past Ethan without a word, though every step took effort. She could feel his eyes on her back, respectful, unaware, simply doing his job. He did not know what he had just done to her. He did not know that his face had cracked open a wound she had spent 10 years trying to seal shut. That night, she could not sleep. She sat alone in her private chamber, looking out at the twin moons hanging low over the capital. On the table beside her rested a small metal box, one she had not opened in years. Inside it was a single photograph, old and slightly worn at the edges. It showed a young man in a formal military coat, smiling in a way that had once made her entire world feel steady. Draven had been a soldier before he was a king. He had earned his crown not through birth, but through courage, through the kind of loyalty that made an entire fleet follow him without hesitation. He had been the reason she agreed to marry into a life of politics she had never wanted. He made the weight of the crown feel lighter, simply by standing beside her. Then came the war, the Outer Rim conflict, fought over territory neither side truly needed, but neither side would give up. Draven had led the final defense of her flagship personally, refusing to evacuate until every crew member was safely off the ship. He never made it off himself. She had not cried at his memorial. A queen was not permitted the luxury of visible grief in front of her people. Instead, she had locked the pain away somewhere deep, buried it under duty, buried it under the endless demands of running an empire alone. And now, 10 years later, a human guard from a planet she barely knew had walked into her palace wearing her husband's face. It made no sense. Crithian and human biology were nothing alike. There was no possible connection between the two. She told herself it had to be coincidence, a strange and cruel trick of fate. But coincidence did not explain the way her chest tightened every time she thought about the guard's steady eyes. The next morning, she summoned her lead scientist, a sharp and quiet woman named Kale, to her private study. "I need information on one of the new human guards," Valith said, keeping her voice even. "The one assigned to the East Wing, Ethan." Kale raised an eyebrow, but did not question the request. "I will have his file ready within the hour, Your Majesty." When the file arrived, Valith read through it twice. Ethan Cole, 31 years old, born in a small town in the country humans called America. Former soldier, honorably discharged, recently accepted into the peacekeeping program due to his discipline and calm temperament under pressure. No unusual medical history, no connection to Crithian space whatsoever, nothing that could explain why he looked like a man from another world entirely. She closed the file and set it down, frustrated with herself for even searching. It changed nothing. He was simply a man who happened to share a resemblance with someone she had lost. Nothing more. And yet, when she stepped out of her study that afternoon and saw him standing guard near the entrance to the throne room, her feet slowed without her permission. He noticed her approaching and straightened immediately, giving a respectful bow of his head. "Your Majesty." "Ethan," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "That is your name, is it not?" "Yes, Your Majesty." His voice was steady, a little surprised that she knew it at all. "You are new to the palace guard." 3 weeks now," he said. "I hope my presence has not caused any trouble." Trouble was not quite the word for it, but she did not say that out loud. "Not at all," she replied instead. "I simply wish to know the names of those protecting my halls." It was a small lie, and she suspected he could tell, but he did not push the matter. "I appreciate that, Your Majesty. It is an honor to serve here." She studied his face for a moment longer than was appropriate, searching for some flaw, some small detail that would break the illusion and prove he was simply a stranger. She found none. Even the small scar above his left eyebrow sat in nearly the same place Draven's had, earned in some accident from his own past life, on a different world entirely. "Carry on," she said finally, forcing herself to walk away before her composure slipped any further. Over the following days, Valeth found herself paying closer attention to the guard rotations than she ever had before. She noticed when Ethan was posted near her chambers and when he was reassigned elsewhere. She noticed the quiet way he handled tense situations, calming nervous staff members with a few simple words, the same gentle patience Draven had once used to steady her own nerves before difficult council meetings. She told herself she was simply being cautious, monitoring a new addition to palace security. She was the queen of an empire after all. It was her duty to know the people who guarded her life. But deep down, she knew that was not the whole truth. One evening, as the palace quieted and most of the staff retired for the night, Valeth found herself walking the long corridor toward the memorial garden, a place she rarely visited anymore. The garden held a statue of Draven, carved from pale stone, his expression frozen in the same calm confidence he had carried in life. She had not planned to go there. Her feet had simply carried her, as if pulled by some quiet force she could not name. As she approached the garden entrance, she noticed a figure already standing near the gate, silhouetted against the soft glow of the garden lights. It was Ethan. He turned as she approached, immediately straightening into a respectful posture. "Your Majesty, I did not expect anyone else out this late. I was told this area falls under my rotation tonight." "It does," she said quietly. "You may continue your rounds." He hesitated, glancing toward the statue behind her. "Is that someone important? I noticed it earlier during my patrol. The craftsmanship is remarkable." Valeth's throat tightened. "That was my husband," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "King Draven. He died 10 years ago, during the war." Ethan's expression softened with genuine sympathy, not the practiced sympathy of a stranger performing politeness, but something that felt real. "I am sorry for your loss, Your Majesty. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," she admitted. "It still is, some days." They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet hum of the garden's night insects filling the space between them. Valeth studied his profile in the dim light, the curve of his jaw illuminated by the soft glow of the garden lanterns, and once again felt that strange, aching familiarity settle over her chest. "May I ask you something personal?" she said finally. "Of course." "Do you have family? Back on your homeworld?" Ethan's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something quieter passing behind his eyes. "My parents passed a few years ago. I have a sister, but we are not particularly close. The military became something like family for me, I suppose." "I understand that feeling," Valeth said softly. "Duty has a way of becoming the only steady thing in one's life." Ethan looked at her carefully, as if noticing for the first time that the queen standing before him was not simply a distant ruler, but a person carrying her own quiet weight. "If you don't mind me saying, Your Majesty, you seem like someone who has had to be strong for a very long time." The words struck somewhere deep, somewhere she had not expected a stranger's voice to reach. She looked away, toward the statue of her husband, unable to meet his eyes for a moment. "I have had no choice," she said quietly. "There's always a choice," Ethan replied gently. "Sometimes it's just harder to see than others." Valeth turned back to him, studying his face once more, searching for answers she knew he could not give her. He was not Draven. He could never be Draven. And yet standing here in the quiet garden, listening to his calm and steady voice, she felt something she had not felt in 10 long years. She felt, for the briefest moment, like she was not entirely alone. "Thank you for your honesty," she said finally, straightening her posture and reclaiming the composed mask of a queen. "I should return to my chambers." "Of course, Your Majesty. Sleep well." As she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her, respectful and quiet, but present all the same. She did not look back, though every part of her wanted to. That night, for the first time in years, Valeth allowed herself to cry. She sat alone in her chambers, the small metal box open on her lap, staring at the worn photograph of the man she had lost. The tears came slowly at first, then all at once, years of buried grief, finally finding a crack to escape through. She did not know what it meant, this strange pull she felt toward a stranger who happened to share her husband's face. She did not know if it was grief playing tricks on her heart, or something else entirely, something she was not yet ready to name. But she knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that her carefully guarded world had just shifted, and there was no simple way to put it back the way it had been before. Outside her window, the twin moons continued their slow climb across the sky, indifferent to the quiet storm building inside the heart of their queen. The morning after her visit to the memorial garden, Valeth woke, with her eyes still swollen from the tears she had shed the night before. She splashed cold water on her face, pressed a hand against the mirror, and forced herself to breathe until the queen she needed to be settled back into place over the woman who had cried alone in the dark. She had a summit to prepare for. The Trade Alliance delegates were arriving within the week to finalize the agreement that would bind Earth and the Crithian Empire together in a formal partnership. It was the kind of event that could not afford distractions, and yet, as she moved through her morning briefings, her mind kept drifting back to a quiet garden and a voice that had told her there was always a choice. She tried to push the thought away. She had a duty to her people, and duty left no room for the kind of confusion swirling inside her chest. But duty, it seemed, had other plans. Chancellor Voss requested a private audience that afternoon, and Valeth agreed, expecting another update on trade logistics or security arrangements for the summit. Instead, Voss closed the door behind him with unusual care, his expression more guarded than she had ever seen it. "Your Majesty, I must speak with you about something delicate," he began. "Go on." "It concerns the human guard. Ethan." Valeth kept her expression perfectly still, though her pulse quickened. "What about him?" "Reports have reached me that you requested his personal file, that you have spoken with him privately, more than once, that you were seen with him last night, near the memorial garden." She felt a flicker of irritation at how closely she was apparently being watched, but she kept her voice calm. "The palace guards report to me. It is not unusual for me to speak with them. With respect, Your Majesty, it is unusual for you to seek out a single guard's company after dark, alone, near your late husband's memorial." Voss's voice was careful, but firm. "The court is beginning to notice. Whispers travel quickly in these halls, and whispers about the Queen's private conduct could become dangerous, especially with the summit approaching." Valeth's jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting I have done something improper?" "I am suggesting that perception matters as much as truth, particularly for a ruler who lost her husband defending this empire. Some may see your interest in this guard as disrespectful to King Draven's memory. Others may see it as a vulnerability that could be exploited by those who do not wish this alliance to succeed." The words landed harder than she expected, mostly because some small part of her feared they held truth. "I have done nothing that dishonors my husband," she said quietly, "and I will not be lectured about grief by someone who has never carried a crown alone." Voss bowed his head slightly, backing down from the confrontation. though his concern did not fully disappear from his expression. "I only wish to protect you, Your Majesty, and the Empire. Please, be mindful of how your actions may be perceived in the coming days." After he left, Valeth sat alone in her study for a long while, staring at nothing in particular. She hated that he was not entirely wrong. She was the queen. Every choice she made rippled outward, affecting far more than herself. She could not simply allow herself to feel whatever she wanted to feel, not when an empire depended on her stability. And yet, when evening came and she found herself walking past the East Wing, her feet slowed once again at the sight of Ethan standing guard near the grand staircase. He noticed her immediately and straightened, offering the same respectful nod he always gave her. "Your Majesty." "Walk with me," she said, surprising herself with the request. Ethan hesitated only a moment before falling into step beside her, matching her pace as they moved down the quiet corridor. "Is something troubling you, Your Majesty?" "Many things trouble a queen," she said. "It comes with the position." "I imagine so." He glanced at her sideways, careful not to overstep. "You seem more tired than usual today, if you don't mind me saying." "I did not sleep well." Understandable, given last night. She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Ethan, may I ask you something, and trust that you will answer honestly?" "Of course. Do you find it strange, the way I have sought you out these past weeks?" He considered the question carefully before answering, which she appreciated. He was not the type to offer empty reassurance simply to please her. "A little, if I'm being honest," he admitted. "I did wonder why a queen would take a particular interest in one guard among many. But I also figured it wasn't my place to ask. You may ask now." Ethan studied her face for a long moment, and Valeth felt her heart pound harder under his gaze than it ever had under the scrutiny of her entire court. "All right," he said slowly. "Why me?" Oh. She took a slow breath, weighing how much truth she was willing to share. "Because you look exactly like him," she said finally. "My husband, Draven. It is uncanny, almost impossible. The shape of your face, the way you carry yourself, even certain expressions you make when you are concentrating. I saw you for the first time and it was as though I had seen a ghost." Ethan's expression shifted through several emotions at once: surprise, then something more thoughtful. "I did not know that," he said quietly. "That must have been difficult for you, seeing me every day." "It has been," she admitted. "I do not fully understand why I keep seeking you out. Perhaps some part of me hopes that being near you will bring him back, even in some small way. Or perhaps I am simply lonely, and grief has made me foolish." "You're not foolish," Ethan said, his voice firm but gentle. "Grief does strange things to people. It doesn't follow logic. I lost my father a few years back, and for months afterward, I kept hearing his voice in crowds, thinking I saw him in strangers, walking down the street. It wasn't foolishness. It was just love that hadn't found anywhere else to go yet." Valeth felt something loosen in her chest at his words, a knot she had been carrying so long she had almost forgotten it was there. "You understand grief better than most people I have met," she said. "I've had practice," he said, offering a small, tired smile. "Look, Your Majesty, I can't pretend to be him. I wouldn't want to, even if I could. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. But if it helps to talk, or to have someone listen without judgment, I'm happy to be that person, if you want me to be." His honesty struck her more deeply than any flattery could have. He was not trying to take advantage of the resemblance, not trying to use it for some personal gain. He was simply offering kindness, freely and without condition. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." They continued walking in comfortable silence after that, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Valeth felt the weight on her shoulders ease, even if only slightly. Over the following days, their conversations became a quiet routine. She would find reasons to walk certain corridors during his shifts, and he would find small moments to check in on her without overstepping his duties. Neither of them spoke openly about what was growing between them, but both could feel it, a quiet warmth building in the spaces between their words. Ethan learned that Valeth had ruled alone for a decade, carrying the full weight of an empire without a single person she could fully trust or lean on. Valeth learned that Ethan had grown up with very little, had earned everything through hard work and discipline, and had chosen this posting specifically because he wanted to be part of something larger than himself, something that mattered. "Why the palace guard specifically?" she asked him one evening, as they stood together near a window overlooking the city lights. "Honestly, I applied for a dozen different postings," he admitted. "This was the one that accepted me, but I like to think there was a reason for it. Some things feel like more than coincidence." Valeth glanced at him, wondering if he meant what she thought he meant. "Do you believe in fate, Ethan?" "I didn't used to," he said, "but lately, I'm starting to reconsider." She smiled, a real smile, the first one that had reached her eyes in longer than she cared to admit. "Careful," she warned lightly. "A queen who believes in fate is a dangerous thing. We tend to chase it recklessly." "Then I suppose I'll have to keep you from being too reckless," Ethan said, his tone teasing, but his eyes serious underneath it. The moment stretched between them, warm and fragile, until the sound of approaching footsteps forced them both to straighten and resume their formal postures. A palace attendant passed by with a brief bow, unaware of the quiet tension he had interrupted. Once he was gone, Valeth let out a small breath. "I should return to my chambers before Voss finds another reason to lecture me about perception. Chancellor Voss doesn't approve of our conversations." "Chancellor Voss does not approve of anything that isn't written into a formal treaty," Valeth said dryly. "But he is not entirely wrong to be cautious. The summit is close. I cannot afford distractions, and neither can you." "I understand," Ethan said, though something in his expression suggested he did not fully want to. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Your Majesty." As she walked away, Valeth realized, with a mixture of fear and quiet hope, that whatever was growing between them was no longer simply about grief, or memory, or the ghost of a man she had lost. It was becoming something new entirely, something that belonged only to her and Ethan, built from honesty rather than resemblance. She did not know yet whether that realization was a gift or a danger, but she suspected, deep down, that she was no longer capable of walking away from it, even if duty demanded that she try. The summit began 3 days later, and the palace transformed almost overnight into a hive of activity. Delegates from Earth arrived alongside representatives from a dozen allied worlds, all gathering to witness the signing of the treaty that would formally bind the Crithian Empire and Earth into a lasting partnership. Valeth barely had a moment to herself, moving from one meeting to the next, reviewing documents late into the night, rehearsing speeches until the words blurred together in her exhausted mind. Through it all, Ethan remained close, assigned as part of her personal security detail for the duration of the summit. It was not something she had requested outright, though she suspected Chancellor Voss had arranged it deliberately, perhaps as a way of keeping a closer eye on the growing bond between them. If that was his intention, it did not work the way he hoped. Having Ethan nearby during the chaos of the summit became a quiet source of comfort for Valeth. In brief moments between meetings, a few seconds while walking down a corridor, or waiting for a door to open, they would exchange small glances, quiet words, tiny reassurances that carried far more weight than their length suggested. "You look exhausted," Ethan murmured to her one evening, as she prepared to enter yet another late council session. "I am exhausted," she admitted, "but exhaustion is a luxury I cannot indulge until the treaty is signed." "Just remember to breathe," he said. "You can't lead an empire if you collapse first." "Is that guard training advice, or personal advice?" "Bit of both," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Mostly personal. I've seen what happens to people who push themselves past their limits. It never ends well." She wanted to ask him more, wanted to know what experience had taught him that lesson, but the council doors opened before she could, and duty pulled her back into the endless cycle of negotiations. It was during the third night of the summit that everything began to unravel. Valeth had stepped away from a formal dinner for a brief moment of quiet, finding a small balcony overlooking the palace gardens. She needed air, needed a moment away from the watching eyes of delegates and advisors alike. Ethan, as always, followed a respectful distance behind, positioning himself near the balcony entrance to keep watch. She had not heard him approach until his voice broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?"
"Always,"
she said, without turning. "Do you ever regret it? Taking the crown, I mean. All of this responsibility, all of this weight." Do you ever wish you had chosen a different life? Valeth considered the question carefully, watching the twin moons rise slowly over the garden. Sometimes, she admitted. There are nights when I imagine what my life might have looked like if I had never been born into this position. A simpler life, perhaps. A quieter one. She paused. But then I remember that this life gave me Draven. And even with everything I have lost, I cannot bring myself to regret the years I had with him. That's a generous way to look at loss, Ethan said quietly. It is the only way I have found to survive it, she replied. He moved to stand beside her at the balcony railing, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence beside her. For what it's worth, he said, I don't think you're foolish for holding on to that. I think it takes real strength to love something so completely, even knowing it might not last forever. Valeth turned to look at him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the dinner party continued faintly behind them, but out here, in the quiet dark of the garden, it felt as though the rest of the world had faded entirely away. Ethan, she said softly, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I am not saying it because of Draven. I am saying it because of you. His breath caught slightly, waiting. These past weeks, being near you, talking with you, it has become the only part of my day that feels honest, she continued. Everything else is politics, performance, duty. But with you, I feel like myself. Not the queen, just Valeth. I feel the same way, Ethan admitted, his voice low. I didn't expect this. I came here to do a job, to serve, to stay out of the way, and follow orders. I didn't expect to fall for the person I was supposed to be protecting. The word hung between them, fragile and enormous all at once. Fall. Before either of them could say anything further, a sharp cry rang out from inside the dining hall, followed by the sound of shattering glass and startled shouting. Ethan's training took over instantly, his calm demeanor snapping into sharp focus. Stay behind me, he said, already moving toward the balcony entrance. Valeth followed close behind as they re-entered the dining hall, finding chaos erupting among the gathered delegates. A serving attendant lay collapsed near the head table, convulsing violently, while panicked guests scrambled away in confusion and fear. Palace guards rushed to secure the room, while medical staff hurried toward the fallen attendant. What happened? Valeth demanded, her queenly composure snapping instantly back into place, despite the alarm pounding through her chest. Unknown, Your Majesty, one of the guards reported. He collapsed suddenly during service. Medical team is examining him now. Ethan positioned himself protectively at Valeth's side, scanning the room with sharp, careful eyes, searching for any further threat. This could be an isolated incident, he said quietly to her, or it could be something else entirely. We should get you somewhere secure until we know more. She wanted to argue, wanted to remain and reassure her frightened guests, but she recognized the wisdom in his caution. As queen, her safety could not be treated as optional, especially during a summit as politically delicate as this one. Very well, she said, but I want answers quickly. Ethan escorted her personally toward her private chambers, staying close and alert the entire way, his hand hovering near his sidearm despite the relative calm of the corridors. Once safely inside, he did not immediately relax. Something about this doesn't sit right, he said, more to himself than to her. You think it was deliberate? I think it's suspicious that someone collapsed during a summit dinner, surrounded by delegates from a dozen different worlds, all of whom have their own reasons for wanting this treaty to fail, Ethan said grimly. I'd rather be cautious than sorry. Within the hour, palace medical staff confirmed Ethan's instincts had been correct. The attendant had been poisoned, though thankfully the dose had not proven fatal. Security swept the dining hall and kitchens thoroughly, though the investigation turned up no immediate suspects. Chancellor Voss arrived at Valeth's chambers shortly after, his expression tight with barely controlled anger. This is precisely the kind of instability I feared, he said. Someone within these walls wishes to see this alliance collapse, and they are willing to endanger innocent lives to accomplish it. Do we have any leads? Valeth asked. None yet, but I would strongly advise increasing your personal security immediately, Your Majesty, especially given how close you are standing to a target. Valeth glanced toward Ethan, who remained silently at attention near the door. My security has already been increased, Chancellor. Voss followed her gaze and sighed heavily. Your Majesty, I understand your fondness for this guard, but this is precisely the moment where personal feelings must be set aside. If someone within this palace wishes you harm, having an emotional attachment to a single guard makes you vulnerable, and it makes him a target as well. He is more than capable of protecting me, Valeth said firmly. That is not my concern, Voss replied. My concern is that an attachment like this can be exploited. If your enemies discover how much you have come to rely on him, emotionally as well as physically, they will use that knowledge against you, against both of you. The warning settled uncomfortably over the room, and Valeth found herself unable to fully dismiss it, no matter how much she wanted to. After Voss departed, silence stretched between Valeth and Ethan for a long moment. He's not wrong, Ethan said finally. I know, Valeth admitted, sinking into a chair near the window, but I do not know how to simply stop feeling what I feel for you, Ethan. I have tried. These past weeks, I told myself repeatedly that this was foolish, that duty demanded I keep my distance, and yet here we are. Ethan crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, meeting her eyes directly. I'm not going anywhere, he said quietly. Whatever risks come with this, I'd rather face them honestly than pretend I don't feel what I feel for you. But you need to understand something too. This can't be about Draven. Not anymore. If we do this, it has to be about us, about who we actually are to each other, not who I remind you of. I know that, Valeth said softly. I have known that for some time now. What I feel for you has grown into something entirely separate from him. You are not a replacement, Ethan. You never could be. You are simply you, and that has become enough. Relief passed visibly across his face, followed by something warmer, something that made her chest ache in the best possible way. Good, he said, because I don't think I could stand being loved as a ghost. You are not a ghost to me, she said firmly. You are the first real thing I have felt in 10 years. The investigation into the poisoning continued over the following days, security tightening throughout the palace as the summit pressed forward under a cloud of tension. No further incidents occurred, though whispers of suspicion continued circulating among the delegates, each faction eyeing the others with wary distrust. Through the uncertainty, Valeth and Ethan grew closer still, their bond deepening under the pressure of shared danger. They stole quiet moments whenever possible, brief conversations in hallways, careful glances across crowded rooms, small gestures of comfort that spoke louder than words ever could. But not everyone within the palace approved of what was blossoming between the queen and her human guard, and as whispers grew louder, so too did the danger surrounding them both. Somewhere within the palace walls, someone was watching closely, waiting for the right moment to turn this fragile new bond into a weapon against them both. News of the poisoning incident spread quickly through the palace, and despite careful efforts to contain the story, whispers reached far beyond the walls of the dining hall. By the following week, several delegates had grown visibly uneasy, questioning whether the summit should continue at all, given the apparent threat lurking somewhere within the palace itself. Valeth refused to let fear dictate the future of her empire. She called an emergency council session, standing before the gathered delegates with unwavering resolve. I understand your concerns, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. An attack against any guest within these walls is an attack against the values this alliance was built upon. I promise each of you that my security forces are working tirelessly to identify those responsible, and I will not allow fear to derail an agreement that could bring lasting peace and prosperity to all our people. Her words steadied the room, at least for the moment, though tension continued simmering beneath the surface of every conversation that followed. Behind closed doors, however, the political fallout from her growing closeness with Ethan had begun spreading through the court like wildfire. What had once been quiet whispers among a handful of advisors had grown into open discussion among the nobility, many of whom viewed the queen's attachment to a human guard as scandalous, even dangerous. She dishonors her husband's memory, Valeth overheard one noblewoman murmur to another during a brief pause between council sessions, unaware the queen stood within earshot, a human, of all things. As if any outsider could understand what it means to rule an empire like ours. Valeth kept walking, refusing to acknowledge the comment, though the sting of it lingered long after she had passed. General Threk, a stern and traditional member of the court, known for his rigid views on Krithian purity, requested a formal audience shortly afterward, and Valeth agreed, suspecting she already knew what he intended to discuss. "Your Majesty," Threk began, his tone respectful but firm, "I speak not only for myself, but for a growing number of concerned nobles within this court. Your closeness with the human guard has become a matter of serious concern." "I was under the impression my personal life remained my own business," Valeth replied evenly. "Ordinarily, I would agree," Threk said. "But you are not an ordinary citizen, Your Majesty. You are the sovereign of this empire, and your choices carry consequences far beyond yourself. An open attachment to a human, particularly one serving in your personal guard, raises serious questions about vulnerability, favoritism, and yes, respect for your late husband's sacrifice." Valeth felt anger rising within her chest, though she kept it carefully controlled. King Draven died protecting this empire because he believed in something greater than tradition for tradition's sake. He believed in courage, in loyalty, in choosing what is right over what is simply expected. I refuse to believe he would want me to spend the rest of my life alone, out of some misguided sense of obligation to his memory. "That may be true," Threk allowed, "but perception matters, Your Majesty, now more than ever. With the summit underway and an unknown enemy already targeting this alliance, any weakness, any controversy, could be exploited by those who wish to see this treaty fail. I urge you to consider reassigning the guard, for his safety as much as your own reputation." The suggestion landed like a blow, though Valeth kept her expression carefully neutral. "I will consider your concerns, General. Thank you for bringing them to my attention." After he departed, Valeth sat alone in her study for a long while, wrestling with the weight of his words. She hated that there was truth buried within his warning, even if his motives felt cold and calculating. The safety of her empire, the success of the treaty, the well-being of her people, all of it depended on stability, and her relationship with Ethan had become, whether fairly or not, a source of instability within her own court. That evening she found Ethan standing guard near the entrance to her private wing, and she gestured for him to walk with her, needing to speak privately. "Something's wrong," he said immediately, reading the tension in her posture. "General Threk requested I reassign you," she admitted. "He believes our relationship has become a political liability, especially with the summit underway." Ethan's jaw tightened, though his voice remained calm. "What do you think?" "I think he is not entirely wrong," she said honestly. "Our closeness has caused talk throughout the court. Some believe I dishonor Draven's memory. Others believe it makes me vulnerable to exploitation, and with an unknown enemy already targeting this summit, I cannot ignore the possibility that our relationship could be used against us." "So what are you saying?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now. Valeth stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "I am saying that I refuse to let fear or tradition dictate who I am allowed to love," she said firmly. "I have spent 10 years being told what a queen should feel, how a queen should grieve, who a queen should be. I am tired of shrinking myself to fit expectations that bring me nothing but loneliness." Relief and something deeper passed across Ethan's face. "Then what do we do?" "We are careful," she said. "We do not give them further reason for scandal until the summit concludes and the treaty is secured. But I will not send you away, Ethan, not unless it is what you truly want." "It's not," he said immediately, without hesitation. "I meant what I said before. I'm not going anywhere." Their moment of quiet resolve was interrupted by the sudden arrival of a palace messenger, breathless and urgent. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but Chancellor Voss requests your immediate presence in the security office. There has been a development in the investigation." Valeth and Ethan exchanged a brief glance before hurrying toward the security office together. Inside, Voss stood over a table covered in surveillance footage and documents, his expression grim. "We have identified the source of the poisoning," Voss said without preamble. "A servant within the kitchen staff, recently hired, with falsified credentials. Security footage shows him administering the substance personally before disappearing from the palace grounds shortly afterward." "Do we know who he was working for?" Valeth asked. "Not yet with certainty," Voss admitted. "But preliminary evidence suggests ties to a faction opposed to the treaty, possibly connected to rival trade interests who stand to lose significant influence should this alliance succeed. We believe the poisoning was intended as a warning, a message meant to destabilize the summit and cast doubt on palace security. And if they escalate further? Ethan asked, stepping forward. Voss's gaze flicked toward him, still carrying traces of disapproval, though the urgency of the situation seemed to override his usual reservations. That is precisely what concerns me. If this faction is willing to poison a servant to send a message, they may be willing to attempt something far more direct against the Queen herself, particularly during the treaty signing ceremony, when security will be stretched thin across a large public gathering. The weight of his warning settled heavily over the room. Vaylith felt Ethan shift subtly closer to her side, his protective instincts sharpening at the mention of direct danger. "We increase security around the ceremony immediately," Vaylith said firmly. "Double the guard presence, screen every attendee thoroughly, and monitor all access points without exception." "Already underway, Your Majesty," Voss confirmed. "Though I must stress again, given the heightened risk, that this is precisely the moment for extreme caution in all matters, personal included." Vaylith understood the warning embedded within his words, but she refused to be swayed by fear. Not now, not when so much depended on moving forward with strength and clarity. "Noted, Chancellor. Thank you for the update." As they left the security office together, Ethan remained close beside her, his expression thoughtful and serious. "The ceremony is in 2 days," he said quietly. "If they're planning something, that's likely their target." "I know," Vaylith said. "I want to personally oversee your security detail that day," Ethan said. "Not because I don't trust the rest of the guard, but because I refuse to let anything happen to you, not after everything we've been through to get here." Vaylith looked at him, seeing not just affection in his eyes but fierce determination, the same unwavering resolve she remembered so vividly from Draven, though she understood now, deeply and completely, that this resolve belonged entirely to Ethan himself. "Very well," she said. "But promise me something in return. Anything. Promise me you will be careful too. I cannot lose you, Ethan. Not now." He reached out, gently taking her hand in his, a small gesture that carried enormous weight, given the formal distance usually expected between them. "I promise," he said softly. "We'll get through this together." As the 2 days leading up to the treaty ceremony passed in a blur of preparation and heightened security, an undercurrent of tension gripped the entire palace. Guards patrolled every corridor with renewed vigilance. Delegates whispered nervously among themselves, and somewhere, hidden within the shadows of the court, the true architects of the danger continued watching, waiting patiently for their moment to strike. Vaylith and Ethan remained close throughout, drawing strength from one another as the weight of uncertainty pressed down around them. Whatever awaited them at the treaty ceremony, they intended to face it together, no matter the cost. The morning of the treaty ceremony arrived under a pale golden sky, the kind of calm, clear weather that felt almost mocking given the tension gripping the palace. Vaylith stood in her private chambers, dressed in formal ceremonial robes, watching her own reflection in the mirror as attendants adjusted the final details of her appearance. She looked every bit the composed, powerful queen her people expected to see. Only she knew how tightly her hands were clenched beneath the long sleeves of her robe, how carefully she was controlling her breathing to keep the anxiety hidden beneath a calm exterior. A soft knock sounded at her door, and Ethan stepped inside, dressed in formal security attire, his expression alert and focused. "Everyone's in position," he said. "Extra guards stationed at every entrance, rooftop surveillance active, and I've personally reviewed the credentials of every attendant working the ceremony today." "Thank you," Vaylith said. "Truly." He crossed the room and took her hands gently in his. "You're going to be fine. I'm not leaving your side today." "I know," she said, managing a small smile, despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "I trust you completely." The ceremony was set to take place in the Grand Hall, a massive chamber decorated for the occasion with banners from every participating world, the long central aisle leading toward a raised platform, where the treaty document awaited its final signatures. Hundreds of delegates, dignitaries, and palace staff filled the seats, while security personnel remained stationed discreetly throughout the room, watching every movement with careful attention. Valeth entered to the sound of formal applause, walking the length of the hall with practiced grace. Ethan positioned a respectful distance behind her, his eyes scanning the crowd continuously for any sign of danger. The ceremony began smoothly, opening remarks from various delegates, praising the historic nature of the alliance, the promise of peace and cooperation between worlds that had once viewed each other with suspicion and distance. Valeth delivered her own address with practiced eloquence, speaking of unity, of moving forward together despite the shadows of past conflicts. As the ceremony approached its final stage, the formal signing of the treaty document, Valeth stepped forward toward the platform, flanked by senior delegates from Earth and several allied worlds. The moment felt monumental, a culmination of months of careful negotiation, finally reaching its conclusion. She had just lifted the ceremonial pen when Ethan's voice cut sharply through the formal atmosphere. "Get down!" Instinct took over before conscious thought could catch up. Valeth felt herself pulled sharply sideways as Ethan's body collided with hers, shielding her just as a sharp crack echoed through the hall, followed immediately by screams and chaos erupting among the gathered crowd. A shot had been fired from somewhere within the upper balcony, aimed directly at the platform where Valeth had been standing only seconds before. Ethan pressed her firmly against the floor behind the platform's stone base, using his own body as a shield while shouting orders toward the nearby security team. "Shoot her in the upper balcony, north side. Lock down all exits immediately." Guards scrambled into action, some rushing toward the balcony, while others formed a protective perimeter around the panicked crowd, trying desperately to restore order amid the chaos. Valeth's heart pounded violently in her chest, adrenaline surging through her veins as she processed how close death had just come. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked urgently, his hands checking over her carefully despite the ongoing danger. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook slightly. "Thanks to you." A second shot rang out, striking the stone pillar near their position, sending fragments scattering across the floor. Ethan shifted his body further to shield her, his own safety clearly secondary in his mind to protecting hers. "We need to move you somewhere secure," he said firmly. "The delegates," Valeth protested. "I cannot simply abandon them." "Security is handling the evacuation," Ethan assured her. "Right now, my priority is you." Before she could argue further, a team of palace guards arrived to assist, forming a tight protective formation around them as they moved swiftly toward a secure exit, Ethan remaining close beside her the entire way, his body positioned protectively, even as they retreated from immediate danger. They made it to a secure chamber deep within the palace's protected wing, where additional guards quickly sealed the entrances. Only once the door closed firmly behind them did Valeth allow herself to fully process what had just happened, her hands trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. "Someone tried to kill me," she said quietly, almost in disbelief, despite the earlier warnings. "And they failed," Ethan said firmly, gripping her shoulders gently to steady her. "You're safe now. I promise you, you're safe." Word arrived within the hour that palace security had successfully apprehended the shooter, a disguised operative who had infiltrated the ceremony, using falsified credentials similar to those used by the earlier poisoning suspect. Under interrogation, evidence quickly emerged connecting him to the same faction responsible for the earlier attack, a coalition of rival trade interests desperate to prevent the alliance from succeeding at any cost. Chancellor Voss arrived at the secure chamber shortly after, visibly shaken but composed. "The threat has been neutralized, Your Majesty. The shooter is in custody, and preliminary investigation confirms he acted alone during the ceremony itself, though clearly as part of a larger conspiracy we will continue investigating thoroughly." "And the delegates?" Valeth asked. "Frightened, but unharmed," Voss confirmed. "Security is currently reassuring them and preparing to resume the ceremony once the situation stabilizes, if you are willing." Valeth took a steadying breath, aware that every eye within the Empire and beyond would be watching to see how she responded to this moment of crisis. "The ceremony will resume," she said firmly. "I refuse to let fear dictate the future of this alliance. If anything, this attack only proves how desperately those threatened by peace wish to prevent it." Voss nodded, clear respect in his expression despite the earlier tension between them regarding her relationship with Ethan. A wise decision, Your Majesty. Though I must say, he added, glancing briefly toward Ethan, your guard's quick actions today likely saved your life. Whatever reservations I held previously regarding your closeness with him, I cannot deny his loyalty, or his skill. It was as close to an apology as Voss was likely to offer, and Valeth accepted it graciously. Thank you, Chancellor. I will not forget it. As Voss departed to oversee preparations for resuming the ceremony, Valeth turned toward Ethan, who remained close beside her, still visibly tense from the danger they had just survived. You saved my life, she said softly. I told you I would, he replied. I meant it. She reached up, gently touching his face, needing the physical reassurance that he was truly there, truly safe. I don't know what I would have done if something had happened to you. Nothing happened, he said firmly. We're both here. That's what matters. An hour later, the Grand Hall had been secured and cleared for the ceremony to resume, delegates cautiously returning to their seats, despite the lingering fear from the earlier attack. Valeth walked once more toward the platform, this time with Ethan positioned openly and prominently at her side, rather than a discreet distance behind her. Whispers rippled through the crowd at this visible shift in protocol, though Valeth no longer cared what conclusions the court might draw. She had nearly died today. She refused to spend whatever time remained hiding her feelings out of fear for what others might think. Standing before the assembled delegates, she lifted the ceremonial pen once more, her hand steady despite everything that had transpired. Let today's events serve as proof, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, that those who seek to destroy peace through violence will not succeed. This alliance will move forward, stronger and more determined than ever. With that, she signed the treaty document, formally sealing the historic alliance between Earth and the Crithian Empire. The hall erupted into applause, relief and triumph mixing together, as the ceremony reached its long-awaited conclusion. In the days that followed, investigation into the conspiracy continued, eventually uncovering and dismantling the network responsible for both attacks, ensuring the treaty's foundation remained secure moving forward. Life within the palace gradually began returning to a new sense of normalcy, though nothing would ever be quite the same as before. One evening, several weeks after the ceremony, Valeth found herself once again standing before the statue of Draven in the memorial garden, though this time, Ethan stood beside her openly, no longer a secret kept hidden from the court. I used to come here alone, she said quietly, carrying grief I never allowed myself to fully release. I thought loving him meant never moving forward, never allowing myself to feel joy again. And now? Ethan asked gently. Now I understand that honoring him means living fully, not simply existing in his shadow, she said. He would not have wanted me to spend the rest of my life alone, punishing myself for surviving when he did not. She reached out and gently placed her hand against the cool stone of the statue, a final quiet gesture of farewell. Goodbye, Draven, she whispered. Thank you for everything you gave me. I will carry your memory with love, not sorrow, for the rest of my life. Ethan remained respectfully silent beside her, allowing her the space needed for this final moment of closure, his presence steady and reassuring, without ever demanding attention for himself. When she finally turned away from the statue, she found him watching her with quiet tenderness, and for the first time since Draven's death, she felt truly, completely at peace. What happens now? Ethan asked softly. Valeth smiled, taking his hand firmly in hers. Now, she said, we discover what our own story looks like, written entirely on our own terms. News of their relationship spread quickly throughout the Empire in the weeks that followed, and though some traditionalists continued voicing quiet disapproval, the overwhelming response from her people proved far warmer than Valeth had anticipated. Many admired her courage, her willingness to choose happiness openly, despite the pressures of tradition and expectation. Stories of Ethan's bravery during the ceremony attack spread widely as well, earning him respect and admiration throughout the court that had once viewed him with suspicion. Even General Threk, though never fully embracing the relationship, offered a grudging acknowledgement of Ethan's loyalty and courage during a formal council session shortly afterward, a small but meaningful step toward acceptance within a court that valued strength and sacrifice above all else. Months later, Standing together on the same balcony where they had first confessed their feelings for one another, Valeth and Ethan watched the twin moons rise slowly over the palace gardens, their hands intertwined, their hearts finally settled into a future neither of them had expected, but both had come to cherish deeply. "Do you ever think about how strange this all is?" Ethan asked, his voice thoughtful. "A human guard and an alien queen, brought together because I happen to resemble a man I never met." "I used to think it was strange," Valeth admitted. "Now I simply think it was fate, giving me a second chance at happiness I never expected to find again." Ethan pulled her closer, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead. "Then I suppose we should stop questioning it, and simply enjoy whatever comes next." Valeth rested her head against his shoulder, watching the moonlight shimmer across the quiet gardens below, finally free from the weight of grief that had defined so much of her life. The Empire continued forward, stronger and more united than ever, built upon a foundation of courage, honesty, and a love that had proven, in the end, entirely its own. And within the walls of the palace, a queen who had once believed her heart could never fully heal again, discovered, quietly and completely, that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most enduring happiness of all.